I don't know if we're meant for the stars, but I still like to hear his voice, see pictures of him maybe. His wife now and then. A handful of things to wake me like sun stains. I used to like to hear his voice, see pictures of him lying with his hair in braids, then using his wife now and then. A handful of things to help me here. I'm alive, I'm static, I'm lying with his hair in braids, then using the sun to part the trees and the trees to help me here. I'm alive, I'm static, I'm not listening to him breathe. I've designed the sun to part the trees and the trees to give way. Sure, he may pull through, but I'm not listening to him breathe. I've designed an answer. The answer to everything is to give way. Sure, he may pull through, but I'm not meant for the stars or braids. I've designed an answer. The answer to everything is to hear his voice. See pictures of him, maybe.
Welcome to the Poet Laureate podcast, a luminous sanctuary for poetry and reflection, recorded at House of Owl Creation Lab in Victoria, BC, on Lekwungen homelands. I'm Kyeren Regehr, and episode 2 of the Poet Laureate podcast is supported by the generous spirit of Munro's Books, a literary landmark in downtown Victoria. Munro's has been a sanctuary for readers and writers alike for over 60 years. Their poetry section is unrivaled and holds 20 years of memory and meaning for me. We just heard Braids by Hollay Ghadery, who is a poet laureate of Scugog, Ontario. Welcome, Hollay, and thank you for being here. That poem just now arrived in our ears. Where did it first begin for you?
It began in a MFA class at the University of Guelph. It was a while ago. I mean, actually, it was just mere minutes ago I was in my MFA, but it was a while ago. It's one of the first poems. It's a pantoum, and I was in a workshop, and we were asked to write a structured poem, and I chose this, and it just came out pretty much fully formed, which never happens to me ever. I usually have to edit poems within an inch of their life to get them to be halfway publishable, or just for me just to want to look at them again. And yeah, this one came out almost fully formed, and it was just laying in bed, really hungover, looking at the sun set in the trees across the road, and I was involved with someone who I found out was actually married. So that's where that comes from.
Wow, is there something in this poem that continues to unfold for you? Perhaps a sound or an image or an emotional center that anchors it for you?
I think just for me, it's a reminder that when I feel lost about anything, it could be something like that experience of finding out someone you were in a relationship with was not being fully honest, or in this case, just I have to write this poem and I don't know how to express what I want to express, and feeling lost, that there's maps and there are ways to do this. And I find form poetry in general to be this wonderful way for me to find my footing when I'm lost for how to find expression, because it's a map. It forces me into a pattern, which sometimes I can break free from. So sometimes I'll start something as a form poem and then it breaks free of that, and the edited final version is not form anymore, but it at least provides me with a sense of solidity while I figure that out.
I love the way you're describing form as a map, particularly when you're not able to catch a hold of the idea or the thing that you're wanting to write about. Do you find that changes the way that you come to the heart of the poem?
No, because I don't feel beholden to the form structure. So if it's not working for me, I will abandon it. I think the heart will be uncovered whether I'm writing form or not. Form is just very useful for me in the times where I'm feeling too frenetic to just let when I feel frenetic, I don't feel free. I feel very uptight, like a kind of spiritual bunged up. And having a form makes me feel freer somehow, because I don't feel like I have all this, infinity worth of possibility. Because of this form, I feel safe and I can only do certain things. So I usually will arrive where I'm going to arrive to, regardless of the form or not. And like I said, if the form I find is limiting me and I'm finding my way and I don't need it anymore, it's like training wheels. Kick them off. You don't need them.
Form as training wheels. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're useful training wheels. I mean, Braids sticks pretty well to a form, and Rebellion Box, the title piece of my collection, is also a form. It's a sestina, so sometimes I stick fairly close to the form, and I don't kick them off. And I think the form is, it creates this meditative state in the poetry that can be very useful. But there's other poems where I think that the form no longer serves because of what you're trying to express or what you're trying to do or where the poem is taking you, in which case like I said, I'll kick off those training wheels and move freely.
Yeah, Rebellion Box was an occasional poem too, right?
Correct, yes.
And I believe you won the Nick Blanchford contest for that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, for anyone listening, that poem was rejected dozens and dozens and dozens, probably over 100 times over the course of 14 years, and then it won this award. So don't give up.
Oh, that's wonderful inspiration for those listening. Thank you, Hollay. I've heard you describe poetry as a means to take control and also to let go. How do you navigate that duality in your writing process?
Well, I think there's nothing more distilled and precise than poetry, or at least the best poetry. But I also feel like, because it can be so ephemeral and existing beyond exact definition, or it's not, again, to use the word beholden, it's not beholden to logic necessarily, but there is an intrinsic sense to it. I think that it will tell you what it wants from you more than any other form. When I write poetry, I feel like it doesn't exhaust me. Whereas writing a collection of short stories, or when I finished my novel, I felt just exhausted by the whole experience. I felt like I was existing in a world that wasn't my world, and I was consumed by it, and I needed to return to my world, but I couldn't until I got these people and places and characters and thoughts out of my head. Whereas poetry is, for me, more of like a lifestyle and it's just at the core of who I am. So, some people say there are novelists who write poetry occasionally. I'm definitely a poet who writes other forms.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that, because you do have, I think, every other type of book almost coming out at the moment.
Yeah, except playwriting. I haven't done that yet. Yeah.
I do want to ask you a little more about what you said about poetry not being beholden to logic.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not beholden to logic, and I certainly am not beholden to logic on my best days. It's going to be interesting for me to explain this. But what I mean is, if you listen to poetry, sometimes it does not make logical sense. The words, the images that the words paint, it's very abstract. It doesn't make logical sense. But like abstract art, it creates a very solid internal sense of feeling, where you feel what you feel in response to these words, and it makes that intrinsic sense, that kind of pre-verbal sense, using words to tap into something that's pre-language, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Can you tell me more about that pre-verbal feeling? How do you know when you're there and everything's lining up? What does that feel like for you?
Well, when I'm writing, when I'm the author of a poem, I don't know if I ever feel like I get there. It's usually other people who let me know I've gotten there. When I'm reading a poem, I know when it's happened, because it's something I just feel. It's on a cellular level. Things are rippling, and to take, for instance, the poem "Full Blown" by Patrick Grace from his collection, who's a BC poet and Victoria poet, from his collection Deviant. This is a poem that, if somebody said, is there a narrative story to this poem? Absolutely not. But it's a poem that absolutely paints a picture.
Yes.
And shows you a feeling of longing and belonging and loneliness. The last lines, and Patrick, if you ever listen to this, I'm sorry if I'm not getting them absolutely right, but it's something about this is heaven, all this burning. It's impossible not to walk across hot tar and think this is heaven, all this burning. And, it's just this really gorgeous, gorgeous poem. But I've spoken to Patrick about the poem, and it's a poem that, as I recall, he said that he just kept taking away words, like really paring it down until it was in the state it was in. And that is something that I find aspirational. Not to say that I don't have poems that are more narrative, but I love poems that are absolutely clairon in their brevity.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really beautifully said. I'm wondering whether you would read us a poem that kind of flows out of what you've been talking about.
I can certainly try. I'll try to choose one of my more not abstract, but one that just is a nugget. It's called Walk It Off. Not doing this again. The sky fat with lakes and lakes fat with skies. Hot parallax mimicking a sky fat with lakes and lunatic ivy in my veins mimicking the plummet of stars down to the lake. A fistful of obsidian ivy. A hawk mimicking heart parallax.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you so much for that poem. Okay, I wanted to ask you, Hollay, you've been involved in so many literary communities and initiatives as a poet. How do these engagements shape your writing and also your understanding of poetry's role in society and in people's lives?
I don't think they shape my writing too much, other than making me feel encouraged to write at all, to write poetry at all, that people care, people are interested, people are curious. So that's helpful. I would say what shapes my writing the most is reading other poets. That is certainly influential to me. If I don't know where to start a poem, I will pick up any book of poetry and read any poem, any book of poetry. It doesn't have to be someone who writes in my style, but it's like a dam is loosened in my head, and it's like, okay, this is the way that poetry thinks, the way that poetry moves is very different from the way that at least I think in my everyday life when I'm on the job and working. So going from my day job mode to writing a poem, I mean, it's two different ways of thinking, and I can't write poetry when I'm being a publicist. Like, it's not the same way of thinking, although there is common core of relationship building and empathy and all of that, but it's not really the same muscle being used. So to kind of warm up that muscle, I'll often read poetry. The community work, on the other hand, that I do in that involvement, it does make me more aware of, more appreciative of, and more inspired to do more community work and keep building this community work and keep building momentum around poetry in hopes that more and more people are kind of sucked into its whirlpool and all the things that it is and all the things that it could be for them, and that it's this completely under celebrated but pivotal art form. I mean, I've said this a million times before, but when somebody tells me they don't like poetry, it's like, well, have you ever been to a funeral, a wedding? And they're like, yes. Well, did they read poetry there? Yes. I'm like, yeah. So if it's the things, if it's this form that's being used to express emotions at some of the most commemorative moments in our lives, whether that's joy or grief or whatever that is, I mean, why do we dismiss it every single day? So I think the more community work I do, the more I'm out there in the community talking to people, it's just this kind of slow unfastening of the outdated, well, I mean, they're not even outdated, they're just false beliefs people
Mm.
have about poetry. Now, if you're talking about doing community work with people who are already in the poetry community, it's preaching to the choir. Like, they're already in the whirlpool. They're already swimming around doing their thing, or drowning, depending on where they are. But yeah, and so like I don't really have to do anything. But I find a lot of my job as a poet laureate is spent trying to justify my existence at all, which
Yeah.
it's kind of forget about being a poet laureate. I probably do that in general. So to be fair, other poet laureates may not have that experience, but when you tell someone you're a poet laureate, at least where I am in this largely rural area, it's always like, what's that? It's a foreign concept to most people. So a lot of my work, especially because I'm the inaugural poet laureate of Scugog Township, a lot of my work is just explaining to people what my role is, which is, to create and celebrate our community through poetry, to create an awareness of the art, but use that art to celebrate people and help the community see how poetry can enrich our lives and, again, our community.
Yeah, wow, it's important work. It's like you're saying, it's taking away or like breaking down those myths and just really incorrect ideas about poetry that have mostly been taught in school. Yeah, do you see poetry as a place that people can rest in and feel and heal and all of that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I have poems memorized because they help me slow down and rest
Mm.
and just uncoil my mind. And I have books of poems all around the house that if I'm feeling frantic or anxious or, as is usual, over caffeinated, I'll just grab a poem and read it slowly. And if I'm not reading it slowly enough the first time, deep breath and read it properly and slowly again. And I mean, I think that poems demand to be read slowly because there's a lot packed in the placement of
Mhm.
words, the way that poems take up the stage of the page. I mean, everything matters and everything informs it. And for most of us, I think, for poets that truly practice with mindfulness, they're not arbitrary decisions about word placement and spacing and all these things. It's not just like we've thrown words on a page, although there might be something to be said for that as well. I don't just throw words on a page. Maybe if you're writing a poem about randomness and an unfeeling universe, and throwing words on the page might be exactly the thing to do. But even that placement is intentional. The random placement is intentional.
I mean, every piece of punctuation, and poets will spend, such a long time. Is it a colon? Is it a semicolon? Maybe it's an M dash.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hollay, what does poetry require of you? I mean, you've spoken about what you need to write and what inspires you, but what does it require of you?
I would just say openness and receptiveness. And I mean, this one's hard for me, but to silence the inner editor during the first outpouring. I find it very unhelpful for me to be editing as I'm going when I'm trying to get the initial draft out, whatever
Mm.
that is, no matter how bananas what I'm thinking or where I'm going feels to me, just to not jump the gun on the editing, because I really am a completionist and I love something being done and I love something being tidy and packaged and neat and check off my list. But poetry forces me not to think of it in those terms as something to be checked off. It's something to really just engage in or as it comes and not push it or rush it along.
How do you talk to yourself about the inner editor when the inner editor appears?
So far, not very nicely, but I don't have a particularly kind inner voice to myself, period. In work in progress. So I don't recommend other people talk to themselves like I talk to myself. The way I talk to myself is like the way my 13-year-old actually talks to me. Like she's my inner voice. And having a young teenage girl as your inner voice is not the best inner voice, like, bitch, slow down, like something like, no, like that's not the way I need to be talking to myself. But it makes me laugh, and humor usually disarms me. Like if I talk to
Right.
myself like my daughter does, and when I disarm myself, I'm able to like relax and receive the message, which is to slow down. And, while I'm writing this poem, 90% of it might be complete and utter garbage. But that's okay, because if you can get 10% of it that's solid, then you can build on that and just embrace the garbage, embrace the 90% garbage, because it is taking you somewhere, or it's taking you nowhere, but at least it's out of your head now. I mean, a really good example is I recently wrote a poem that has been in my head for 20 years. And it took 20 years of trying and failing and not knowing where to start and not knowing my way into it to just one day write one line that was the way in. Of course, for the first draft, there was a lot that I got changed and moved out and moved around, and the structure was played with, and all of this stuff. But I finally, after 2 decades, got a poem out. I mean, I think that is a testament to trying to be
Wow.
patient.
Yeah. Yeah. And persistence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
well, the image, the thought, the experience wouldn't go away. So even if I
Right.
wanted to abandon it, I really couldn't, because it was persistent. I may have not been as dedicated to the idea as the idea was to me.
Now that you've written it, do you find that it's not bugging you anymore?
Absolutely. And I'm really happy with it. I've read it at 2 open mics that I've hosted for Poetry Month so far, and I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely caught myself editing as I read, and which open mics are wonderful for, because you're where you're reading for an audience. And one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received about performing anything, whether it's poetry, prose, nonfiction, whatever, is to put yourself in the seat of the audience and think about how you want the audience to feel, how you want them to receive the work. And that helps remove any jitters, number one, because suddenly I'm not on stage, I'm in the audience, which is a nice, safe, innocuous place to be. And it also helps me think about how I'd be hearing this. So I can edit and change a word here and there, realize a line is actually sounding clunky. So I'm actually quite, pleased with how it turned out, and pleased that it's finally out of my head.
Hmm. Hollay, do you find that you write for an audience at times, or are you writing for someone in particular, or do you write for yourself primarily?
I would either be myself or writing for this kind of romantic notion of, I don't, something I would have wanted as a kid, like writing towards an
Mm.
enchantment, writing towards an
Oh,
enchantment of the world, writing towards an idea of enchantment. Which, I mean, enchantment or anything can only exist by acknowledging its opposite, right? Like the contrary. So I mean, anyone who's read my work knows I definitely don't shy away from darkness, but
mm-hmm.
I think it's poetry is a constant exercise in trying to re-enchant myself with the world, because I feel sometimes very bitter, and I feel very angry, and I feel just like I want to burn it all down. And poetry is the opposite of that. But I have to acknowledge it, to move towards this perpetually re-enchantment of myself, because I'll be in this enchanted state and be like, oh, this is wonderful, and then the world comes in and crushes that, and then you have to do it again and again and again until I feel better. It's a constant. As an addict, I feel qualified to use this. It's like a bump, a hit, a constant hit, another hit, another hit, another hit. But poetry is not that instant. It can take a while to get there. Reading other people's poetry is almost instant. So for me, the reading and writing of poetry are not completely two separate things. It's feeding the same tank, it's filling the same vessel.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm hearkening back to that other poem that you were speaking about. I'm wondering whether you'd be willing to read it for us, whether you have it there.
Oh,
And
the new one?
yeah.
Oh, let me see.
Or if you have another one, that's fine too. But I want to thank you, Hollay, for your presence and your words today. And I want to let our listeners know that books by Hollay Ghadery are available at munrosebooks.com for international shipping, or at their iconic downtown Victoria storefront, alongside a selection of poetry that invites you to linger. Explore voices from across the country and around the world, all gathered under the timeless arches of Munro's Books. Hollay's impressive biography can be found on the podcast website and in the notes, as well as appropriate links to her work. Hollay, would you be willing to leave us with a final poem?
Sure, I will read the poem. I was talking about being grateful that it's finally out of my head. Pending doubtlessly more edits, but this is my first podcast open mic kind of feel here. The title is Tour of the Universe, CN Tower, 1985. It's a soft sneakered stroll through the city at night. Mom's pleated khakis, a floral waft from her wrists, a hand around mine. She has tickets to a star show in a place there's no stars. And still, her face turns to sky, my eyes to her face, retinas of streetlight fold to periphery. And this now is already starshine. When she asks if I'll remember all I've learned, if I'll stay awake on the drive home, if I'll love her forever, I want to mean it when I promise, somehow.